To understand the Viking afterlife, we must first understand how the Norse viewed death, fate, and the soul. For them, death was not an end, but a transformation, a journey from one realm to another. Life and death were deeply woven into the fabric of fate, controlled by forces that even the gods could not escape. At the heart of Norse cosmology stood Yggdrasil, the world tree, whose branches and roots held the 9 realms. The realms of the living and the dead existed side by side, often separated by little more than a veil of fate. The Norns, mysterious female beings, wove the destinies of gods and men alike, carving runes into the tree's roots. Their work determined who would live, who would die, and how each soul would meet its end. To a Viking, the way one died mattered. A warrior slain in battle was honored and often believed to be taken to Valhalla or Fólkvangr. But those who died of old age, illness, or other unheroic causes might find themselves in hell, a realm ruled not by fire and torment, but by cold silence and shadow. The soul itself was a complex concept. Norse belief did not revolve around a single, indivisible soul like in many later religious systems. Instead, a person had multiple spiritual elements. There was the hugr, which was the mind, thoughts, and will; the hamr, a kind of shape or form that could change, especially in dreams or in death; and the fylgja, a spirit companion, often taking the shape of an animal, linked to one's fate. The Disir and Valkyries, female spirits associated with family and battle, also played roles in guiding souls after death. Burial customs offer clues to these beliefs. High-status warriors and chieftains were often buried with weapons, food, ships, and sometimes even slaves or animals. These items weren't mere symbols of status, they were thought to be needed in the afterlife. Grave goods served as tools, protection, and provisions for the journey beyond. The ship burial, in particular, reflects the idea that the soul must travel across some cosmic sea to reach the next world. Interestingly, cremation was also common, especially in earlier periods. The burning of the body released the spirit and helped it pass into the next realm. The smoke, rising toward the sky, was sometimes believed to carry the soul toward the gods. But this wasn't always seen as a path to Valhalla. The specific destination depended on more than just the funeral ritual. Valhalla, often portrayed in modern culture as the one and only Viking heaven, was actually one of several possible destinations for the dead. It was ruled by Odin, the Allfather, and reserved for the brave, those chosen by Valkyries on the battlefield. But even Valhalla had a specific purpose: to prepare warriors for Ragnarok, the end of the world. The Einherjar, fallen heroes who trained and feasted in Valhalla, were not resting in peace. They were waiting to fight again, to battle in the final war alongside Odin. For others, there was Fólkvangr, a realm ruled by the goddess Freya. It is said that Freya took the first pick of those slain in battle, while Odin took the rest. Fólkvangr was a field or meadow, perhaps more peaceful than Valhalla, but equally noble in purpose. This duality in the warrior afterlife shows the richness of Norse belief. It wasn't just about honor and glory, but also balance and harmony between the gods. Then there was Hell, the realm of the dead not taken in battle. It was not a place of punishment in the Christian sense, nor was it necessarily shameful. It simply existed as the natural destination for those whose lives ended in quiet ways. Ruled by Hel, the daughter of Loki, this realm was cold, dark, and distant. But it was also orderly and essential, a place for the majority, not a prison for the damned. The idea that only warriors had a glorious afterlife is a modern oversimplification. Farmers, mothers, seers, craftsmen, all had their place in the grand scheme. Some believed in reincarnation within families, others in ancestral protection from beyond. The dead were not forgotten. They were honored, spoken to, and invited to feasts. Burial mounds became sacred sites, not just tombs, but bridges between the living and the dead. The Norse also believed in restless spirits, those who died violently or with unfinished business. These spirits, called draugr, could rise from their graves and haunt the living. They were not necessarily evil, but dangerous and powerful. Proper burial rites and remembrance were crucial to prevent such unrest. A well-buried soul had peace. A forgotten one might return with rage. What emerges is a deeply personal and communal view of death. The afterlife wasn't something abstract and far away. It was part of everyday life. It shaped how Vikings lived, how they fought, and how they remembered their ancestors. In their worldview, death was a door, not a wall. And what lay beyond that door depended not just on how you died, but on how you were remembered. Among all the realms of the Viking afterlife, none has captured modern imagination like Valhalla, often depicted as a golden hall in the sky, filled with feasting warriors and endless battle. Valhalla was more than just a reward. It was a duty, a calling, and a preparation for the end of the world. The word Valhalla comes from Old Norse Valhall, meaning Hall of the Slain. It was located in Asgard, the realm of the Aesir gods, and ruled by Odin, the god of war, wisdom, and death. But entry into Valhalla was not automatic, even for brave warriors. Only those chosen by Odin's shield maidens, the Valkyries, were allowed to enter. These supernatural beings roamed battlefields, selecting the most worthy fallen to carry to their master. The journey to Valhalla began in death. As warriors fell in combat, the Valkyries appeared, sometimes described as beautiful maidens, other times as fearsome spirits in armor, riding wolves and carrying spears. They would lift the soul from the fallen body and guide it to Asgard. The journey might involve crossing dangerous bridges, sailing across otherworldly seas, or passing through hidden gateways. These were not literal routes, but spiritual transitions reflecting the belief that the soul had to prove itself even after death. Once in Valhalla, the warrior joined the ranks of the Einherjar, the lone fighters. These were the chosen dead, honored above all others. Every day, they trained and fought each other in glorious combat, dying and rising again without pain or lasting wounds. Each evening, they feasted together in the vast hall of Valhalla, whose ceiling was made of shining shields and whose rafters were spears. The meat came from a magical boar named Sahrimnir, who was cooked and reborn each day. The mead flowed from the udders of a she-goat named Heidrun, who grazed on the leaves of Yggdrasil itself. Valhalla was not a place of eternal rest. It was a military camp, a spiritual boot camp, preparing for Ragnarok, the final battle of the gods. When the end came, the Einherjar would ride with Odin to face the giants, monsters, and the dead in the ultimate clash of fate and fire. Their time in Valhalla was one of glory and anticipation, not peace. But despite its grandeur, Valhalla was only one version of a warrior's afterlife. As noted earlier, the goddess Freya also received fallen warriors in her realm, Fólkvangr. While less is known about this place, it seems to have been a peaceful field or meadow, perhaps a gentler counterpart to Valhalla's constant combat. Some scholars believe that Freya's hall, Sessrumnir, was a place of healing and rest rather than battle. This division reflects the duality within Norse beliefs: war and peace, fire and earth, frenzy and fertility. Valhalla's ideal was also a social construct. It served as both a religious belief and a cultural motivator. To die in battle was not only spiritually powerful, it was socially respected. It reinforced a warrior ethic, especially among the elite. Skaldic poetry praised those who fell bravely, and sagas often portrayed heroes longing for a death that would grant them entry into Valhalla. Even old men, dying in bed, might grasp a sword in their final moments, hoping to trick fate and win a warrior's death. However, there are hints in the sagas and archaeological records that not all Vikings shared the same vision of Valhalla. Some burial mounds are peaceful, filled with domestic items and feminine symbols. Others suggest a belief in rebirth, ancestral presence, or spiritual journey rather than eternal battle. Valhalla, while dominant in myth and poetry, may have been an ideal promoted by a warrior class rather than a universal doctrine. Furthermore, the idea of being chosen complicates things. Valkyries did not just select the bravest, they followed Odin's will. And Odin, for all his wisdom, was unpredictable and often manipulative. He might take a warrior not for their heroism, but for their potential use in Ragnarok. In some tales, Odin even engineers the deaths of heroes he desires in Valhalla, arranging their fates through trickery or prophecy. This introduces a deeper, darker layer to the myth. Valhalla is not a paradise, it is a trap of fate. The warriors there are not saved, but summoned for a cause beyond their understanding. Their glory is real, but so is their doom. They live in splendor, but they are tools in a divine war that cannot be won. And yet, for the Vikings, this was not a contradiction. To live fully, to fight bravely, to die with honor, these were the pillars of life. The promise of Valhalla was not peace, but purpose. It gave meaning to struggle, to loss, to the chaos of the world. It offered a vision where death was not defeat, but transformation into something greater. Modern depictions of Valhalla often romanticize or sanitize this vision. They show endless drinking and partying, with little mention of the training, the violence, or the burden of destiny. But to the Norse, it was all connected. Feast and fight, glory and doom, life and death. Each was a step in the eternal cycle. Ultimately, Valhalla represents the Norse obsession with fate, courage, and the acceptance of one's role in a grand, cosmic story. It is not heaven, it is not reward. It is the next chapter for those whose lives burned brightest in the chaos of battle. While Valhalla shines with fire and glory in Viking lore, the majority of the dead were believed to go somewhere else, somewhere colder, quieter, and far less romanticized. That place was hell. But to understand hell is to untangle centuries of confusion, fear, and Christian reinterpretation. Because in the Norse worldview, hell was not hell. In Norse mythology, hell is both a place and a being. As a realm, hell is the land of the dead, who did not fall in battle. It lies beneath one of the roots of Yggdrasil and is often described as cold, dark, and distant. As a figure, Hel is the daughter of Loki and the giantess Angroda, sister to the Midgard serpent Jormungandr and the wolf Fenrir. Odin cast her into the underworld and gave her dominion over the dead. She is described as half alive and half dead, one side of her body beautiful and the other decayed or skeletal. This duality reflects her role, guardian of death, but not necessarily an enemy of life. Hel is not a devil, nor is she malevolent. She simply governs what must be governed. Her realm receives those who die of sickness, old age, accidents, or any death not marked by the sword. Hel's halls are said to be vast and cold, with names like Eljuthnir, meaning sprayed with snowstorms, and furnishings with ominous names like hunger for her plate and famine for her knife. But these are poetic descriptions, not literal punishments. There's little in the original sources to suggest that Hel tortures the souls in her care. Instead, she watches over them, in a place beyond the living, a necessary counterbalance to the chaos of life and war. The confusion between Hel and the Christian Hel arose later, as Christianity spread through Scandinavia. Missionaries and scribes often equated Hel with their own concept of eternal punishment, and later retellings began to reflect this. But in the original Norse view, Hel was more of a final destination than a punishment. It wasn't shameful to go there, it was normal. In fact, many believed that family members could still communicate with those in Hel. Burial mounds were visited regularly. Offerings were left. Names were passed on to children, sometimes in hopes of reincarnation within the family line. The dead were never fully gone. Their wisdom, strength, and presence remained a part of the living world. Ancestor worship and reverence were deeply ingrained in Norse culture, and Hel's realm was a key part of that. Hel was not the only alternative to Valhalla or Fólkvangr. Some tales speak of the Alfar, or elves, and their mysterious dwellings underground. In some cases, the dead were believed to become elves, spirits tied to burial mounds, watching over their descendants. Others speak of sea burials, where souls might join the ancestors in the deep. The Norse world offered multiple destinations after death, depending on who you were, how you lived, and how you died. There was also the belief in reincarnation, particularly within one's own family. A child might be named after a deceased relative and inherit not just their name, but part of their spirit. This wasn't seen as strange, it was a natural continuation of the family's power and presence. Dreams, visions, and omens were often interpreted as messages from the dead, guiding the living across generations. Some souls, however, found no peace. The Draugr undead spirits were feared as revenants who returned to the world of the living. These beings often dwelled in their own graves, guarding treasure or seeking revenge. They were physical, strong, and dangerous. To prevent a person from becoming a Draugr, specific rituals were followed: cutting nails, binding the body, placing special objects in the grave. Fear of the unquiet dead was very real. And so was the desire to bury correctly and respectfully. Hel also plays a role in the great prophecy of Ragnarok. At the end of time, she will release an army of the dead, led by her own forces, to battle the gods. This is not out of evil, but destiny. In Norse myth, even the gods are bound by fate. Hel, like her siblings, fulfills her role in the cosmic balance. Life must end, the world must die, to be reborn. The diversity of afterlife beliefs in Norse culture reflects a worldview that was far from simplistic. There was no single heaven or hell. Instead, there were paths intertwined, mysterious, shaped by personal action and cosmic order. There was a place for warriors, a place for the peaceful dead, a place for ancestors, and even a place for those who returned. These beliefs also changed over time and by region. Icelandic sagas, Norwegian poetry, and Swedish grave goods don't always tell the same story. Local customs shaped how death was understood and honored. And as Christianity began to merge with local beliefs, new hybrids appeared: crosses and Thor's hammers buried side by side, prayers to both Christ and the old gods. Hell reimagined through a Christian lens. But at the core, the Norse view of the afterlife was about relationship between the living and the dead, the gods and mortals, the past and the future. Death was not feared as an end, but faced as a part of the journey. The dead remained part of the community, honored in feasts, stories, and stone. To the Vikings, the world was not divided neatly into good and evil, reward and punishment. It was complex, cyclical, and rooted in destiny. Hell was not a place to be feared, but a realm to be understood. And in that understanding lies the true legacy of the Viking afterlife, a world where every soul had its place, and where memory was stronger than death itself.